The marble floor was so cold it burned. Nora Hartley collapsed onto it at 2:34 in the morning, her entire body trembling like a leaf caught in a hurricane, and the sound of her gasping breath filled the silence of Aleandro Valenti's mountain lodge like a siren no one had called for. Her auburn hair, matted and plastered to her deathly pale face, dripped water onto the expensive stone. Her lips were tinged blue. Her left temple bled steadily from a gash that looked like it had been carved by something sharp, something intentional. The backpack she had carried for 6 months spilled open across the floor, and everything she owned in this world scattered like the possessions of a ghost. 3 shirts, each one thinner than the last. A water bottle, empty. 1 photograph in a plastic sleeve, creased beyond repair. And there, among the ruins of her existence, lay exactly 5 crumpled dollar bills and an eviction notice with a deadline stamped in red ink that read 12 days. 12 days. 6 men in tailored black suits stood frozen throughout the lodge, their hands moving toward the guns concealed beneath their jackets by pure instinct, pure muscle memory. Sergio, with his scarred knuckles and his face like a granite wall, did not move. Enzo, younger, broader across the shoulders, with a small gold cross hanging from his neck, did not move. The other 4, names that belonged to the underworld, did not move. They were waiting. They were always waiting for him to tell them what to do, and he had not yet spoken a word. Aleandro Valenti stood at the security monitor wall at the far end of the lodge, and his dark eyes, storm grey, penetrating, the kind of eyes that had ordered men to their deaths, remained locked on the screens. All 12 screens showed the same moment from different angles. All 12 screens showed the same woman. He had watched this footage 17 times in the past hour. 17. The exact timestamp read November 18th, 4:47 in the afternoon. 3 days ago. On the screen, Nora Hartley stood on Bourbon Street in the November rain, her thin jacket offering no protection against the cold that descended like a curse. A black delivery truck approached at 28 miles per hour. And in its path, playing with a toy soldier on the wet pavement, stood a 7-year-old boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. Oliver? His son. The truck did not slow. The driver did not see the child. And Nora Hartley, this woman Aleandro had never met, this invisible person who had no home and no money and no reason to care about a stranger's child, threw herself into traffic like a blade through butter. She grabbed Oliver by the collar of his coat and hurled him backward just as the truck's mirror passed so close to her face that it tore a piece of her jacket. Both of them hit the wet pavement hard. She curled herself around the boy, protecting him with her own body, and then she lay there breathing like she had just been pulled from drowning. When she stood, she did not look around for thanks. She did not look for cameras. She simply picked Oliver up, set him on his feet, and disappeared into the crowd of Bourbon Street like a ghost that had finished its haunting. Aleandro had watched the footage 17 times, and his heart had stopped each time at the same moment, the moment she threw herself in front of the truck. His chest still felt like it had a stone sitting on it, pressing down, suffocating. "Boss," Sergio whispered, and his voice cracked like he had been screaming. "Should we?" Aleandro raised one hand, and Sergio fell silent. The gesture was small. The authority was absolute. The woman on the floor was the woman from the screens. The woman who had saved Oliver's life. The woman who had disappeared from every camera, every shelter, every corner of New Orleans that Aleandro's men had searched for the past 72 hours. They had found nothing. They had found her by accident, or by fate, or by something that Aleandro did not have a name for. A woman soaked in rain and blood and the kind of exhaustion that came from months of running, of hiding, of living on $5 when you owed the city $85,000 in 2 weeks. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply lay on his floor like something that had already died and was just waiting for the burial. Aleandro descended the marble staircase with the kind of deliberate slowness that made grown men nervous. Each footstep echoed. Each step was a decision. His cashmere coat, the color of charcoal and worth more than she had earned in a year, swept behind him like a shadow. His tailored suit was black, the shirt beneath it open at the collar, revealing the broad chest and the scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs, a scar from another lifetime, another choice, another moment when mercy and survival had collided. He knelt beside her. Not because he was a kind man. He had never been a kind man. He knelt because in 17 minutes of watching that footage, something had shifted in his chest, something had cracked, and he could not find the engine to stop it. Her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of wet earth, and they held the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly how many ways a moment like this could end badly. "Do not be afraid," he said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath. "You saved my son. You saved Oliver. And now you are safe." Behind him, Marco and Enzo exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years. In 15 years of working for Aleandro Valenti, they had never seen him kneel beside anyone. They had never heard him say the word safe in any context. They had never watched him remove his cashmere coat and drape it across a stranger's shoulders like she mattered. Like she was precious. Like she was not nobody. The rain continued to fall outside the lodge, hammering against the windows, rattling the storm shutters. The fire in the stone fireplace crackled and hissed. And upstairs, in the room with the blue walls and the nightlight shaped like a moon, a 7-year-old boy slept with tears on his cheeks, calling for a woman he had seen once and would never forget. He was calling for Nora. He was calling for the woman who had become family the moment she threw herself in front of that truck. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to 3 days earlier, to the moment when November rain started falling on Bourbon Street and Nora Hartley was still invisible. November 18th. 4:32 in the afternoon. The rain came sideways on Bourbon Street, turning the old asphalt into a mirror of dying neon. Pink and blue and sickly green reflected in puddles that looked like wounds in the pavement. Nora Hartley stood outside the shuttered women's shelter, reading the notice stapled to the plywood door, and the words blurred in front of her eyes. $85,000. 12 days. Criminal trespassing charges if she did not pay. If she did not pay, the storage unit would be sealed. Her mother's medical records would be gone. The last photographs of her family, 3 boxes held together with string, would be thrown into a landfill and buried under the weight of other people's abandoned lives. She had exactly $5 in her jacket pocket. 5. The bills were wrinkled and soft from being handled too many times, counted and recounted like a prayer that was not working anymore. The rain hammered the brim of her baseball cap. She was 29 years old and looked at least 40. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones, that you cannot sleep away, had carved itself into her face. Her hands were raw from cleaning other people's bathrooms, her back perpetually bent from double shifts at the diner where the cook threw food scraps at the staff when they moved too slowly. Her hair, once black and thick, hung in thin strands that she kept short because she could not afford scissors and could not bear to see herself in mirrors anymore. She turned away from the shelter and began walking toward the parking garage 3 blocks south. The October forecast had promised clear skies. The November sky had other plans. The rain was not cleaning, it was erasing. Washing the neon signs into rivers of color, turning the street into something unreal, something that felt like drowning while standing on pavement. 3 blocks. That was how far her 10-year-old sedan was parked. A 2013 Honda Civic that barely started anymore, that sounded like it was coughing its last breath every time the engine turned over. Home. That was what she called it now. Not in her head but out loud, alone in the parking garage late at night, sitting in the back seat with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Home. Like the word itself could transform metal and rust and the smell of stale fast food into something that mattered. She was 1 block from the car when she heard the scream. Not a child's cry of pain. Something worse. The sound of a small voice calling out in confusion, the way children sound when they do not understand what is happening, when the world has suddenly shifted and nothing makes sense anymore. Nora's head snapped up. There. At the intersection of Bourbon and Toulouse, a red balloon was rising into the rain-dark sky, caught in the wind, ascending toward the clouds. And beneath it, running into the street with his small arms stretched upward, was a child. 7 years old. maybe 8. Dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. A white shirt that probably cost more than everything Nora owned. His mouth open, calling out, reaching for the balloon as it drifted higher. The delivery truck did not see him at first. It was moving fast through the intersection, the rain reducing visibility to nothing. Nora saw the truck at the exact same moment she saw the child. She saw the gap between them, 10 feet of black asphalt, 6 feet of rain-soaked air, a calculation that her mind made in a single burning second. She ran. Her body moved before her mind caught up with it. Her legs carried her across the pavement, through the rain, toward a collision that her conscious brain understood but her body had already decided to prevent. The delivery truck's horn screamed, a sound like an animal dying, a sound that ripped across the wet street and bounced off the brick facades of the old buildings. Nora's hands grabbed Oliver around the waist. She lifted him. He was small, impossibly small, light as a prayer, and threw both of them backward. They landed hard on the wet pavement, the truck missing them by inches, the air displacement from its passing hot against her face, smelling of diesel and rubber and the ozone smell of something almost catastrophic. The truck kept going. It did not stop. After a moment, a second vehicle pulled over, the driver confused, uncertain, backing up slowly to see what had happened. Oliver was crying. The sound came from somewhere deep in his small body, a wail of pure terror and confusion. Nora pulled him close, running her hands over his arms, his legs, checking for injuries with shaking fingers. "You are okay. You are okay, sweetheart. Just breathe. In and out. You are safe. You are safe." The child stared at her with eyes that were enormous in his pale face. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held the particular terror of a child who has just discovered that the world was not a safe place. "The balloon," he whispered. "The balloon is gone." "The balloon is gone," Nora agreed, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. "But you are here. You are alive. That matters more than any balloon." That was when the man in the expensive suit appeared. He moved through the rain like someone who did not bother to acknowledge weather. Tall. Dark suit that probably cost more than a month of her rent, the kind of suit that hung on broad shoulders and spoke of tailors and money. His face was angular, sharp, the kind of beautiful that had nothing to do with kindness. He had a scar running from the corner of his eye to his cheekbone, thin and white against his olive skin. He was not alone. There were men behind him, 3 of them, dark-suited and silent, moving with a kind of coordination that came from practice. From routine. From being part of something organized and dangerous. The man with the scar knelt down and scooped Oliver up without ceremony. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice was not loud. It was somehow worse for that. Quiet. Dangerous. Like a blade wrapped in ice. "You ran into the street. You almost died. Do you understand that? Do you?" Oliver's lip trembled. He had stopped crying. The presence of this man, his father, though Nora did not know that yet, had triggered a different kind of fear. The fear of disappointment. The fear of anger from someone whose anger mattered. "I wanted the balloon," Oliver whispered. The man pulled out a phone. He spoke into it in Italian, rapid and clipped. Nora caught a word here and there, negligent, and a name, Enzo, and how is this possible, and finally, "I want answers, and I want them now." He looked down at Nora. His eyes were storm gray and they held no mercy. They held no warmth. They held the calculating gaze of someone weighing whether she was a threat or an asset or simply an inconvenience. "You pulled him back," he said. It was not a question. Nora tried to stand. Her vision swam. She had not eaten in 2 days. The last meal had been leftover chicken wings from the diner that the cook had thrown toward the trash and she had caught, cold and congealed, eaten in her car park behind the building so no one would see. Before that, nothing. Before that, she could not remember. Yes, she managed. He was going to be hit. I can see that. The man was still looking at her, still calculating. What is your name? Nora. Nora Hartley. He did not offer his name in return. He simply nodded to Enzo, the man who had originally scooped Oliver up. Enzo immediately stepped forward with an umbrella, black, expensive, and extended it over Oliver's head. The child reached his small hand toward Nora. His fingers were still extended toward her, even as his father carried him away. "Vivi," Oliver called out. His voice broke on the syllables. "Vivi, thank you. Thank you for saving me." Nora raised her hand. She did not speak. By the time her mouth could form words, they were already walking away, disappearing into the rain, becoming shadows and then nothing at all. The expensive car, a black SUV with tinted windows, pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic without hesitation. She stood alone on the wet pavement. Her clothes were soaked. Her whole body was shaking. Not from cold. From something else. From adrenaline crashing through her system like a wave breaking against stone. She did not see the security cameras. There were 4 of them, one mounted on the corner of the building to her left, one on the street lamp directly overhead, one on the facade of the shuttered bar across the intersection, and one on a traffic camera at the corner. All 4 of them had captured her in high definition. All 4 of them had recorded every movement she made, every expression on her face, every trembling moment of her choosing someone else's child over her own survival. That footage was being transmitted to a server owned by Aleandro Valenti's security company. It would be arriving at his office within the hour. Nora picked up the red balloon, which had somehow blown back down to the pavement during the chaos. It was waterlogged, sagging with the weight of rain. She held it in her hands for a moment, then let it drop into a nearby storm drain. She watched it disappear into the darkness below. Then she walked the remaining 2 blocks to her car and climbed into the back seat and sat in the growing darkness, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She would sleep there tonight. She had slept there every night for 7 months. 483 nights. She was counting them now like a prayer that was not working anymore. 11:18 that night. Aleandro Valenti sat in his office on the 42nd floor of the Valenti building in the financial district. The office was all black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of New Orleans spread below him like a kingdom he had spent 20 years building. The rain continued to fall. It drummed against the glass. He was furious. "How is this possible?" he said to Enzo, who stood before the desk like a soldier at attention. "How does my 7-year-old son run into traffic? How does your attention falter for the 30 seconds it takes for a child to become a statistic?" "I stepped away to take a call," Enzo said. His face was pale. "I was gone for less than 2 minutes. That is all it takes." Aleandro's voice was quiet. "More dangerous for that. Less than 2 minutes." Sergio, his other lieutenant, entered without knocking. Sergio had been with Aleandro for 15 years. He knew the contours of his boss's anger the way a sailor knows the shape of the sea. He moved quickly to the desk and set down a tablet. "The security footage," Sergio said. "From the intersection. All 4 angles." Aleandro did not want to watch it. He already knew what had happened. Oliver had told him in halting, frightened sentences. But he tapped the play button anyway. The footage was high definition. The timestamp read for 32 p.m. He watched Bourbon Street in color, saw the neon signs bleeding into the rain, saw the delivery truck moving through the intersection, saw the small boy running into the street with his arms extended upward. And then he saw her. A woman in a threadbare jacket that had been patched in at least 3 places. Black hair, wet, plastered to her skull. She was running. Her face was contorted with focus, with the pure animal determination of someone who had decided in a single second that another person's life mattered more than her own safety. She grabbed the child. She threw him backward. They both landed on the pavement in a tangle of limbs and rain-soaked fabric. The truck passed close enough to move her hair with its displacement. Close enough that Aleandro, watching this footage 17 minutes after it had happened, felt his entire body go rigid with the understanding of how close his son had come to dying. How close he had come to a loss from which there would be no recovery. The woman checked the child for injuries. Her hand shook. He could see it from the security camera angle. Her hands were raw. They were the hands of someone who had worked herself to exhaustion. She whispered to the child. He could not hear her, but he could read her lips. "You are safe. You are safe." And then Enzo appeared. And then the black SUV. And then she was alone on the pavement, and the footage ended. Aleandro watched the footage 3 more times. Each time he saw something new. Each time he felt something shift in his chest, something move, some locked door beginning to open. "Find her," he said finally. His voice was low. Deadly. "I want her name. I want her location. I want to know everything. Where she works. Where she sleeps. Who she is and why she has nothing. I want to know every detail." "It is already in progress," Sergio said. "Facial recognition is running across the city database. Traffic cameras, ATM footage, diner surveillance. We should have a name within the hour." They had a name in 37 minutes. Nora Hartley. 29 years old. No current address. Last known employment, the Riverside Diner, shift ended at 3 p.m. on November 18, 7 months homeless. Blacklisted from the shelter system. Denied employment at 17 different businesses in New Orleans. No reason given in any of the files. Just rejection after rejection, door after door, closing. "Who did this to her?" Aleandro asked. Sergio's fingers flew across the keyboard. The name appeared on the screen within seconds. Margaret Harrington. 58 years old. Board member of the New Orleans Housing Commission. President of the United Charities Foundation. One of the most respected names in philanthropic circles. Her picture showed a woman with blonde hair styled in an expensive wave, diamonds at her throat, a smile that looked practiced. A smile that never reached her eyes. And the connection? Aleandro asked. "We are still digging. But preliminary investigation suggests personal vendetta. Harrington has systematically blocked Hartley's access to shelters, employment, housing assistance. Every door we find that is closed in Hartley's life has Harrington's signature on the rejection." Aleandro stared at the screen. He stared at Margaret Harrington's blonde hair and her practiced smile and her diamonds. He stared at the woman who had decided that another human being deserved nothing. Deserved poverty. Deserved the pavement and the cold and the slow erosion of hope that came with being nobody in a city full of somebodies. "What we discover next changes everything," Sergio said quietly. "Tell me," Aleandro said. "There is a man. Anthony Marchetti. He has been conducting surveillance on Nora Hartley for 4 months. He has attempted to contact her 7 times. She has refused all attempts. The most recent was 2 weeks ago. He became aggressive." "He?" Sergio hesitated. "Say it," Aleandro said. "He told her he would drag her into his network. He has connections to human trafficking operations in 3 states. He implied that rejection would result in forced involvement. That her refusal to cooperate was not permanent. That it was only a delay. The office was very quiet. Outside the windows, the rain continued to fall. Oliver was upstairs, in the room with the blue walls and the nightlight shaped like a moon. He had cried himself to sleep an hour ago, still calling for the woman from the rain. Calling for Vivi. Calling for the woman who had saved him and then disappeared. Aleandro closed his eyes. In 17 minutes of footage, a woman he had never met had done what no one in his organization would have dared to do. She had placed another person's life above her own. She had chosen to save Oliver when she herself was drowning. And now she was not drowning. Now she was being hunted. Now she was in the crosshairs of 2 forces intent on destroying her. 1 male. 1 female. One physical and one social. One offering violence and one offering the slow violence of bureaucratic erasure. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. The office at the lodge was suspended in silence, the kind of silence that comes before thunder. Aleandro sat motionless at his desk, the security footage still frozen on screen, Nora's exhausted face, the moment her body moved before her mind could catch up, saving Oliver. His fingers drummed once against the mahogany surface. One strike. That was all it took to restart a heart he thought had calcified 8 years ago. Sergio stood by the window, watching the snow fall in thick, suffocating sheets. The financial records came through, Sergio said quietly. Margaret Harrington owned 17 properties in New Orleans. The storage facility is one of them. She has been extracting penalties from delinquent renters for 3 years. The money does not go to storage, it goes to a shell corporation. That corporation is owned by Anthony Marchetti. Aleandro did not move. How many women? 43 that we can identify. Some went into his network. Some disappeared entirely. Sergio's voice carried the weight of confirmed nightmare. Margaret Harrington hand-selected every single one. She identified them through her charity work, her church connections, her advisory board positions. She found the desperate. She found the invisible. Then she handed them to Marchetti like she was passing appetizers at a gala. The rage that moved through Aleandro's body was cold and surgical. It did not explode. It crystallized. When did she call? 3:11 p.m. We traced the line to her penthouse in the Garden District. She is there now, preparing for a charity benefit tonight. 200 of the wealthiest people in New Orleans will be in attendance. She is hosting a fundraiser for her so-called women's shelter, the same shelter that blacklisted Nora after Margaret made a single phone call. Aleandro finally looked up. His eyes were the color of a winter sky before a storm. She is going to pay for every single woman. And Marchetti is going to pay for wanting mine. The word mine hung in the air like a blade. Downstairs, Nora was teaching Oliver to draw. They sat at the great kitchen table with its view of the snow-buried forest, and Oliver's small hand moved across the paper with the absolute conviction of childhood. He was drawing the mountain. He was drawing the house. He was drawing a figure with long hair standing between them. "That is Mama," Oliver announced, pointing at the stick figure. His pronunciation was precise, careful, the way he said every word like it was a prayer. "Mama stays here now. Papa said so." Nora's throat tightened. She had been at the lodge for 37 hours. She owned the clothes on her back and nothing else. She owed $85,000 to a woman who wanted her destroyed. And this small boy with Aleandro's dark eyes and his mother's gentleness was looking at her like she was safe ground in a drowning world. "Oliver, I need to tell you something." Nora set down her pencil. "Your papa is very kind, but I might not be able to stay. There are some people who want to hurt me. Your papa is trying to help, but—" Oliver shook his head with the certainty that only a 7-year-old possesses. "Papa is the strongest man in the whole city. He said so. He said nobody can hurt people he loves." The words landed like a fist in her sternum. Nobody can hurt people he loves. Nora did not know if Oliver had made that connection deliberately or if it had simply fallen from his mouth the way truth often does, unfiltered, absolute, devastating in its innocence. She reached out and brushed his dark hair from his forehead. "Your papa is very wise. He is sad though," Oliver said matter-of-factly. "He thinks nobody sees, but I see. He looks at your pictures and his eyes get sad like the sky before rain." Oliver returned to his drawing, adding another figure beside Nora. "This is Papa. He is not sad anymore because you are here." At 6:15 p.m., Aleandro found Nora in the library. She was standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the last light drain from the sky. The snow had stopped. The world looked scrubbed clean, but the silence was absolute, the silence of something waiting. He did not announce himself. He simply watched her from the doorway. She was wearing one of his sister's sweaters, burgundy cashmere that cost more than the monthly rent on her first apartment. It hung loosely on her frame. He made a mental note to have the kitchen prepare protein-rich meals. Muscle memory and bone density did not rebuild overnight. Neither did trust. Marchetti is expanding his operation, Aleandro said, and Nora turned. Margaret Harrington has been feeding him women for 18 months. Tonight, she is hosting a benefit at her penthouse. 200 of the richest people in the city will be there, donating to her shelter while she empties out women who refuse to comply with Marchetti's demands. Nora's hand went to her chest. How many women? 43 that we can confirm. There may be more. He crossed to her. The carpet muffled his footsteps, but she heard him anyway. She heard everything. Fear had made her hyper-alert to sound, to movement, to the proximity of danger. Margaret called me at 3:56 this afternoon. She told me you belong to her legal system. That your debt makes you property. She was very clear that you will not leave this property without consequences she has already engineered. So I am trapped here, Nora said flatly. I am just trading one cage for another. No. Aleandro's voice cut like a blade. You are not trapped. What you are is protected while we dismantle every structure they have built. He pulled out his phone, showed her the financial document Sergio had compiled. Shell corporations. Bank transfers. Communications between Margaret and Marchetti that amounted to confessions. By tomorrow morning, every one of these women will know the truth. By the end of the week, Margaret Harrington will lose her shelter, her reputation, and her freedom. Marchetti will lose everything. Nora stared at the screen, at the evidence of systematic cruelty compressed into spreadsheets and email threads. How is this even possible? She is connected to judges, to the police, to the governor's office. And I am connected to people who care more about truth than politics. Aleandro lowered the phone. Nora, I need you to understand something. I have spent 15 years building an empire based on the principle that I take care of what is mine. My organization is mine. My son is mine. My word is my absolute. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability so sudden it was almost violent. You saved Oliver. That means you are mine to protect. And I do not protect carefully. I protect absolutely. The room felt smaller. Nora could hear her own heartbeat, the soft hum of the fireplace behind them, the wind testing the windows. She could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. What happens to Margaret and Marchetti? She asked. Justice, he said simply. Not death. Death is too quick for what they have done. Too easy. Too merciful. His jaw tightened. There are 43 women who will stand in courtrooms and testify. There are police officers and judges who will finally face the evidence of their own corruption. Margaret will lose her money, her standing, her freedom. Marchetti will spend 40 years in federal prison watching women he thought he owned testify against him. They will spend the rest of their lives understanding that their power was an illusion built on the helplessness of others. At 11:43 p.m., as Aleandro was leaving Nora's room, his phone vibrated. A text from Sergio. 2 words, they are moving. Aleandro descended the stairs. In the great room, Marco and Enzo were already geared. Body armor beneath tailored black jackets. Communications earpieces. Weapons checked and secured with the discipline of men who had trained together for more than a decade. They did not question. They simply moved. Marchetti's operation in the warehouse district, Sergio reported, his voice steady through the comm system. 12 men. They are holding 3 women in a warehouse off Bourbon Street. Shipping records indicate they were supposed to leave the city by midnight. Margaret made a call 30 minutes ago that spooked them. They are accelerating the timeline. Aleandro pulled on his coat. Black cashmere. Italian leather gloves. The uniform of power worn without apology. 30 minutes until we move. I want every federal agent, every clean cop, every judge we own in position. When we hit that warehouse, I want the evidence contaminated nowhere. I want this prosecuted so thoroughly that Marchetti spends the rest of his natural life wondering if he dreamed his freedom. He looked at Marco and Enzo. My son is asleep upstairs. Nora is asleep upstairs. If anything happens to this house, you will answer for it with your lives. Understood? Yes, boss, they said in unison. At 11:52 p.m., Aleandro went back to Nora's room. She was not asleep. She was sitting at the window in the dark, watching the night forest, and when she heard him enter, she did not turn. She simply waited. He sat on the edge of the bed. I have to go. There are people who need help tonight. I will return before dawn. Nora finally turned to face him. In the darkness, he could barely make out her features, but he could feel the weight of her attention. Are you going to kill someone? No, he said. I am going to save someone. There is a difference. Come back, she whispered. Those two words, just two, seemed to cost her everything. I always come back, Aleandro said. He reached out, and his hand found hers in the darkness. His palm was warm. His grip was steady. Not because I am invincible. Because there is something here that requires my return. He left before she could respond, before she could see what happened when a man who had spent 8 years being numb discovered that feeling was not weakness. It was transformation. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited with their engines running, exhaust visible in the frozen air. 12 men dressed in dark clothes that cost more than annual salaries moved with the synchronization of a perfectly programmed machine. They were his people. His brothers in all but blood. And they were about to make Margaret Harrington and Anthony Marchetti understand that the invisible women they had hunted for so long had finally been seen. The warehouse door would splinter in 28 minutes. Everything changed at 12:17 a.m. But in that moment, driving through the sleeping city toward reckoning, Aleandro could only think of Nora's voice in the darkness. Come back. He would. No matter what waited inside that warehouse, no matter what violence had to be administered or what justice had to be served, he would return to a woman who had somehow rebuilt what he thought was permanently shattered. He would come back because she had asked. He would come back because love, once it breaks through a fortress, does not settle for anything less than everything. The warehouse door splintered inward at 12:17 a.m. 12 men dressed in black suits that cost more than annual salaries moved through the darkness like a blade wrapped in ice, their footsteps synchronized, their breathing controlled. No shouts. No unnecessary violence. Just precision. Just purpose. Anthony Marchetti sat in the center of the cavernous space, surrounded by shipping containers and the smell of rusted metal and old secrets. He had been waiting for this moment, though he did not know it. Every predator believes he is untouchable until the moment he discovers he is not. Enzo emerged from the shadows first, his massive frame blocking the exit. Then Sergio, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who had orchestrated every detail of this reckoning. Finally, Aleandro stepped into the light cast by a single overhead bulb, his dark coat hanging like a cloak around his broad shoulders, his eyes burning with something that transcended anger. This was justice in its purest form. This was the moment when mercy was no longer an option. Marchetti scrambled to his feet, his cultured accent cracking like thin ice. Valenti. I knew you would come eventually. I have a proposition. Money. Information. Whatever you want. I want nothing from you, Aleandro said quietly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, each word deliberate and devastating. Except your understanding of what you have done. I have done nothing that you have not done. We are the same, you and I. No. Aleandro crossed the warehouse floor, his movements unhurried, each step measured. I have built an empire on loyalty and survival. You have built a network on the destruction of women who had nothing to defend themselves with. That is not the same. Marchetti's hand moved toward his jacket. Enzo was there in 2 seconds, disarming him, forcing him to his knees on the cold concrete. The trafficker's face slammed against the floor, his nose bleeding into a small, red pool that reflected the overhead light like a mirror of his own insignificance. "Please," Marchetti whispered, trembling like a cornered animal. "Please, Valenti. We can make a deal. I have contacts, I have documentation of other operations, I can help you expand." "Expand into what?" Sergio stepped forward, a manila folder in his hands. "Into the lives of more desperate women? Into the networks of victims you have built?" "No, Marchetti. That chapter is closed." The folder opened. Photographs spilled across the concrete. 7 women. 8. 10. Each with a face, a name, a story of how they had disappeared into his network, broken and sold and forgotten by a world that had grown numb to their suffering. Marchetti looked away. He could not bear to see the evidence of what he had become. At 6:33 a.m. this morning, Aleandro said, crouching to Marchetti's level, Margaret Harrington was arrested at her estate in the Garden District. Embezzlement. Conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Racketeering. Fraud. Every charge carries federal penalties. Every testimony from her victims is on record. Her lawyers cannot save her. Her money cannot save her. Her social connections cannot save her. Marchetti's face went white. No. No, she promised me she was untouchable. She said the police. The police answer to me in this city, Aleandro said. The FBI answers to evidence. And the evidence is overwhelming. At 9:15 a.m., as Nora sat in the lodge with Oliver pressed against her side, watching the morning news unfold on the television screen, she saw it. Margaret Harrington, emerging from her mansion in a silk robe, her face defiant until the cameras started flashing. Then something in her crumbled. Her shoulders collapsed inward. Her carefully constructed dignity shattered like glass. The news anchor's voice was crisp and professional. Prominent philanthropist Margaret Harrington was arrested this morning on multiple federal charges, including embezzlement of over $300,000 from the Orleans Parish Housing Commission and conspiracy in a human trafficking ring. Federal investigators allege that Ms. Harrington provided financial support and legal resources to known trafficker Anthony Marchetti in exchange for a percentage of his illegal operations. Nora's hands shook as she held the television remote. $300,000. That was the number that made it real. That was the number that transformed Margaret Harrington from a distant threat into a concrete criminal, arrestable, prosecutable, finite. Oliver tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, why are you sad?" "I am not sad," Nora said, and realized it was true. What she was feeling was something deeper than sadness. It was relief. It was the weight of 9 months finally lifting from her shoulders, like a stone that had been pressing on her chest since the day Marchetti first found her in that diner. At 11:41 a.m., the news broke about Anthony Marchetti. The footage was everywhere within minutes. Federal agents leading him from the warehouse district, his expensive suit torn, his face bruised from where it had met the concrete floor. He was no longer the charming predator who could manipulate desperate women into trusting him. He was diminished. He was prey. The camera caught his voice breaking, "I did not do anything." "You cannot prove." 47 counts of human trafficking, the federal agent said, reading from the charges with the tone of someone reciting a grocery list. Conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence includes financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from 12 survivors, and documentation of operations spanning 7 states. By noon, Anthony Marchetti's bail had been denied. Margaret Harrington's assets were frozen. Their names appeared on every news channel, their faces becoming the visual shorthand for predation, for the systematic destruction of vulnerable women who thought themselves invisible. Nora watched as Margaret's charity board released a statement condemning her. Her country club revoked her membership. Her society friends disappeared like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The woman who had spent years convincing everyone that Nora was a liar, a troublemaker, a nobody with nothing credible to say, was now facing 87 years in federal prison. The phone rang at 1:27 p.m. Sergio's voice was calm on the other end. "It is done. All charges against you have been dismissed. The $85,000 debt has been cleared. Margaret's frozen assets covered it with penalties to spare. The storage facility is yours. Your warrant is expunged from the system. You are free." Free. The word seemed too small for what had just happened. Too inadequate for the way her entire universe had been restructured in the span of 12 hours. When Aleandro returned to the lodge at 4:19 p.m., his dark coat was still pristine, his hands were clean, and his eyes carried that same burning intensity that had never wavered. Oliver heard the car in the garage and bolted from his room, throwing himself at his father with the unself-conscious joy that only children can muster. "Papa, Papa! You fixed it! Mama is staying!" Aleandro lifted his son, pressing him against his chest, and over Oliver's shoulder, his eyes found Nora's. The look that passed between them was not triumph. It was acknowledgement. It was the recognition that something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of both their lives. Nora stood, her legs trembling slightly. "Sergio told me. About the warrant. About all of it." Margaret Harrington believed herself untouchable, Aleandro said, setting Oliver down and moving toward Nora. "I spent years learning that the only thing truly untouchable in this world is the person you choose to protect. I chose to protect you. I chose to protect my son. Everything else was simply the mechanics of that choice." He closed the distance between them, his shadow falling across her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lodge was quiet around them, the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed, when the world is still settling back into place. "I have something else for you," Aleandro said. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, worn with age, with a symbol carved into its lid, a phoenix rising from flames. Nora's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a photograph and a letter, handwritten in Italian, and beneath those, a key. "That house belonged to my mother," Aleandro said quietly. "She died when I was 8 years old. I have not been there since I was 12. I think it is time for it to hold a different kind of memory. A different kind of life. If you want it." Nora looked at the photograph. A small cottage with white shutters, surrounded by trees heavy with Spanish moss, a garden running wild with flowers, a gate painted blue like the sky. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. "You already have," Aleandro said. "Because the moment you saved my son, you became family. And family does not leave. Family does not disappear. Family stays." Oliver wrapped his small arms around Nora's legs. "Mama stays with us forever." Nora looked down at the child, then at the man standing before her, then at the photograph of a house that was being offered to her not as charity, but as sanctuary. "Yes," she said. "Forever." But what neither of them knew was that Aleandro had one final revelation waiting, one that would require Nora to choose between the safety she had finally found and the truth about her own past that was still buried, waiting to resurface like a body that could not remain submerged. The phone on the desk began to ring. The phone on the desk began to ring. Aleandro stared at it for 3 rings before answering. His voice shifted immediately into something sharp, something dangerous. "Speak." The voice on the other end belonged to Marco, one of his men stationed at the federal courthouse downtown. What Marco said made Aleandro's jaw tighten. He listened without interrupting, his free hand curling into a fist against the mahogany desk. "Confirmed?" Aleandro asked. "Confirmed, boss." Both sentences handed down 2 hours ago. Marchetti got 40 years. Harrington got 35. Aleandro hung up without responding. In the quiet that followed, he could hear the sound of Oliver's laughter from the other room, where Nora was teaching him to make paper snowflakes. The contrast was almost unbearable, innocent joy separated by one closed door from the knowledge that 2 people who had hunted Nora relentlessly were now locked away in federal cells, their power dissolved, their empires ashes. He stood and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, gentle now, the blizzard having passed. The city below glittered under streetlights, indifferent to the justice that had just been served in a courthouse downtown. 60,000 people out there had no idea that the woman teaching a child to cut paper into symmetrical shapes had survived what most people could not. That she had looked into the eyes of her tormentors and testified, her voice steady as a blade, for 6 weeks while her hands trembled beneath the witness stand. Nora appeared in the doorway. She had changed into one of the sweaters Aleandro had left for her, soft grey cashmere that made her look less haunted, less like a woman who had been counting coins days ago. "Oliver wants to show you the snowflakes," she said. "He thinks they are the most beautiful things he has ever made." Aleandro turned from the window. "Then I should see them." But before he moved toward her, he crossed the office to the mahogany desk and withdrew a leather folder from the bottom drawer. It was the kind of folder that held documents that changed lives. He had been planning this moment since the day he reviewed the security footage. Since the moment he saw her throw herself into traffic for a child who was not hers. "Come here," he said quietly. Nora approached, uncertain. There was still a guardedness in her, a habit of expecting pain disguised as generosity. Aleandro understood this. He had lived inside that same protective shell for 8 years. He opened the folder and withdrew a single document, placing it on the desk between them. "I want you to read this carefully." Nora's eye scanned the page. They widened. Her hand came to her mouth, trembling. "Aleandro, what is?" "It is the deed to your mother's house," he said. "The one Margaret foreclosed on. The one she sold to a developer for $217,000. I purchased it back 3 weeks ago. The paperwork is finalized. It belongs to you now. Free and clear. No debt. No obligation." Nora's knees buckled. Aleandro caught her before she fell, his hands firm on her waist. She was shaking, her entire body vibrating like she might shatter into pieces. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. The words came out fractured, broken. "This is too much. I do not understand why you would." "Because Margaret Harrington believed she could destroy you," Aleandro said, his voice like stone. "She believed that if she took your home, your safety, your dignity, she could erase you. Make you disappear into nothing. And she tried, Nora. She tried very hard. But she failed. Because you are still here. And now your mother's house is yours again. Not as charity. Not as debt. As a reminder that some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how much power someone claims to have." Oliver appeared in the doorway, his small face confused by the intensity in the room. "Mama? Are you sad?" Nora turned, and when she did, tears were streaming down her face, but her smile was radiant. "No, Oliver. I am very, very happy." The boy came to her, wrapping his arms around her legs. "Is it because of the pretty house?" Aleandro watched Nora look down at the child, then back at the deed in her shaking hands. "Yes," she said. "Because of the pretty house. And because some people believe in second chances." That night, after Oliver was asleep, Nora sat on the edge of the guest room bed and stared at the deed. She ran her fingers over the embossed seal, the signatures, the official stamp that made it real. Her mother's house. The place where she had learned to braid her mother's hair, where she had sat at the kitchen table watching her mother pay bills, carefully writing down each check in a small notebook. The place Margaret had taken from her with a foreclosure notice and a cold smile. Now it was hers. She heard a soft knock on the door. Aleandro stood in the hallway, still dressed in his dark suit, looking like a man who belonged in penthouses, not guest room doorways. "You should rest," he said. "I cannot stop looking at this," Nora replied, holding up the deed. Aleandro entered and sat beside her on the bed. For a moment, he did not speak. "Then, when my mother died, my father took me to her grave once. Only once. He said grief was a luxury we could not afford. He said the only thing that mattered was survival. Power. building an empire that no one could ever take from us. He paused. I have spent 15 years following that philosophy. And it made me very powerful. But it also made me very empty. You are not empty, Nora said, turning to him. You are just learning to feel again. Because of you, Aleandro said. That day I watched the security footage, I saw something I had not seen in a decade. I saw someone willing to risk everything for another human being. Someone whose love had no calculation in it. No cost-benefit analysis. Just pure, terrifying courage. He took her hand. I want to learn from that. I want to become someone who understands that kind of love. And I cannot do it alone. What are you asking me? Nora whispered, though she already knew. I am asking you to stay. Not because of this house, or because of Oliver, though he would break if you left. I am asking you to stay because I have realized that survival without love is just a slow death. And I am tired of dying slowly. Nora's breath caught. She looked at their intertwined hands, his large, scarred, capable of terrible things and beautiful things in equal measure. Hers small, calloused, but no longer shaking. I will stay, she said. For Oliver. For you. For the woman I am becoming, who is no longer invisible. Who is no longer nobody. 3 months later, the New Orleans sun was setting like molten gold over the Mississippi, and Nora stood on a balcony she had never imagined owning access to. She wore a simple white dress, and in her hand was a bouquet of white roses that Aleandro had delivered that morning with a note that read, "For the woman who saved my life by saving my son's." Below, in the penthouse living room, 200 people stood in elegant silence. Senators, city officials, legitimate business owners who had no idea that the man about to marry was the same man who had orchestrated the arrest and imprisonment of 2 of New Orleans' most dangerous criminals. Sergio and Enzo stood near the windows, dressed in suits that cost more than most people's cars, their eyes glistening as they watched their boss wait at the altar. Oliver, age 7 now, stood beside his father in a tiny tuxedo, holding the rings in a small velvet box. He had been telling everyone for weeks that his papa was marrying his mama, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. To him, it was. The music began. Nora walked toward Aleandro, and in the moment their eyes met, everything else disappeared. The weight of what she had survived, the foreclosure notices and the trafficking threats and the hunger and the fear, all of it receded into shadow. What remained was only this, a man who had chosen her. A child who called her Mama. A house with white shutters waiting for them in the bayou country, surrounded by oak trees and Spanish moss and a garden growing wild with flowers. You are crying, Aleandro said softly when she reached him. Happy tears, Nora replied. I did not know they existed until I met you. They do, Aleandro said. And they taste like redemption. The ceremony was brief. When the priest asked if anyone objected, Sergio and Enzo exchanged a look, and in that silent communication was the understanding of 15 years of loyalty and respect, now transformed into something neither man had expected, hope. Their boss was no longer a monument to vengeance. He was a man learning to love. At the reception, Nora moved through the crowd in her white dress, and people she had never met embraced her, congratulated her, welcomed her into a world she had only glimpsed from the margins. Margaret Harrington was in a federal prison 300 miles away, serving 35 years for embezzlement and racketeering. Anthony Marchetti was 2,000 miles away in a maximum security facility, his 40-year sentence a permanent reminder that some debts cannot be ignored, some crimes cannot be forgotten. But Nora had made a choice she had not expected to make. She had forgiven them. Not because they deserved it. Not because forgetting was possible. But because holding on to the weight of her hatred was like carrying a stone in her chest, and she was tired of being crushed beneath it. Later that night, alone on the balcony with Aleandro while Oliver slept in a guest room nearby, she told him this. I forgive them, she said simply. Not for their sake. For mine. Because I want to walk into my mother's house and remember only the good things. The way she braided my hair. The way she sang in the kitchen. Not the way others tried to destroy what she built. Aleandro pulled her close, his hand resting on the back of her head like she was something precious, something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing she existed. "Forgiveness is not weakness," he said. "It is the strongest thing I have ever witnessed." "And what about you?" Nora asked. "Have you forgiven your brother?" For a long moment, Aleandro did not answer. "Then, I am learning. Every day with Oliver, I understand more why my brother made the choices he did. I cannot excuse them. But I can stop letting them define me." "That is redemption," Nora whispered. "No," Aleandro said, tilting her chin up so she could see his face in the city lights. "You are redemption. You saved my son from traffic. You saved me from becoming a ghost wearing a human face. You taught me that survival is not the highest achievement. Love is." Below them, New Orleans glittered like a woman who had been waiting her entire life to tell a story that mattered. And somewhere in that city, in a courtroom, in a federal prison, in a foreclosed house that had been reclaimed, in a child's laughter, in the simple act of a man and woman choosing each other despite everything, the story was being told. This is what happens when security cameras capture more than just moments. When they capture the instant everything changes. When they show us not what we were, but what we are capable of becoming. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is simply choosing to believe that second chances exist. If this story moved your heart, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to believe in redemption. Subscribe for more stories that prove we are never too broken to be healed. What story should we tell next? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again tomorrow.